Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 32, and I'm super excited to welcome on Mikael Cho, who is currently the CEO of Unsplash. So most of you are probably familiar with Unsplash and have used it in the past, like myself, but if not, it's the largest platform for finding higher resolution free images and will pass 1 billion downloads this year alone. It's a really incredible story of going from initial side project to now leading platform. So I'm super excited to welcome Mikael on and learn more about it here today. So Mikael, welcome to the group chat. And it's great to have you join us here today. Maybe before we get into Unsplash, if you could start off by sharing a little bit more on your background and then what led you to start Unsplash, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm in Montreal, Canada. So my background came from the US. First job I got here, I didn't know that you needed to speak French, so I couldn't really find a job anywhere. Started at an agency who happened to have like US clients. That's when I really saw the power of the internet. Started working with designers and developers, and just got more and more interested in building online products. So that's where it originally came from. And up here, they had just started an accelerator program, which is kind of like Y Combinator, but in Montreal, and decided to enter that with pretty much like an idea, no business or anything. But all of the ideas that eventually we went through a whole first year of trying to come up with things that would make sense to be a great business. Unsplash happened to be an accident that was designed to grow one of those original business ideas.
Awesome. Yeah, and could you share maybe a little bit more just kind of context with us on, what that business was at the time, maybe that time period, and then, your kind of thought process behind maybe launching Unsplash as a side project?
Yeah. I have a habit of just kind of always ending up creating marketplaces. So the first business was Crew, and it was a creative talent marketplace. So what we did is connect high quality projects with high quality designers and developers, automated sort of all the nasty stuff like the legal, sales, project management to try to get that out of the way. That largely came from my experience working in an agency and also being a freelancer. So I've also always been obsessed with kind of building things that solve problems that I saw, because I just felt that I had sort of a unique understanding of what could go into a potential solution. And when we were building that, it takes a lot of time to sort of build up what you need to do to be able to capture the transaction. So largely in a marketplace like that, the way that you can really build something at scale is to try to own the transaction. So you're taking a percentage, but in order to do that, you need to build a lot of value into the platform. And we knew that would probably take at least a year or 2 years before it was strong enough. So we thought, what are some things that we could sort of get people hanging around on our front porch? That's what we called it. And the ideas for that were, we were on the phone with a lot of customers all the time, and we would just talk and they would understand. They would say all these different problems. Of course, yeah, maybe they're looking to hire a designer, they're talking about that, but they would bring up things like, I don't know how to price this. How do I find images for this? How do you think about like even starting the company? Like, what do you need to do for that process? And what we decided to do was, those are moments where we could create like a front porch of solving these little problems before they need the actual problem that the company solves. So Unsplash was just one of those little problems that we heard and we had resonated with as well as designers ourselves. So when we made the first version of our website for Crew, we had leftover photos from that. We felt, hey, we could execute on this pretty quick, with minimal resources, and it could maybe be a growth thing for us that would help. So we took those 10 images that were left over, put them up on a Tumblr blog in an afternoon, bought a domain, and I'm super embarrassed by it. So I didn't really share it anywhere except for Hacker News, because I'm like, okay, if it's going to get shit on, it'll get shit on Hacker News anyway. So let's just put it in that spot. Didn't look at it. And then a couple hours later, the photographer we worked with, he texted me and he's like, I don't know what you did with that site because my portfolio is blowing up. Went back to Hacker News and it was #1. Checked the logs and we had about 30,000 downloads on those 10 images. So it was just like kind of totally unexpected. I thought maybe 1,000 designers would find it useful. It seemed like it really hit a chord and was a problem for a lot more people.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing the story on that. So, at that point, like what was next?
So the focus was growing Crew.
Mhm.
We were all in. We had about 6 months left worth of capital from the money that we had raised because we had cycled through different ideas to try to figure things out. Uh, that unsplash mentality, I think, really helped us in that time frame. So figuring out how to make things that were relatively low cost, like time investment, but could automatically either create the demand, and that's usually the hardest challenge, like the biggest proof point. A lot of these marketplace concepts seem like they should exist, and you're often like, why doesn't this thing exist? Like these two people, it happens in your life all the time. These two people should connect, and the internet is more efficient at doing that. Why isn't there like a thing that makes that happen? And what I've seen is usually it's getting over that first part, that like that chicken and egg, the supply and demand. How do you attract that one side that's a lot harder than the other side? And in our case, it was the demand side. So how do you consistently bring in enough high quality projects so that you've got enough work for the designers who are constantly looking for good work to be working on? So Unsplash was a repeated way, and that's what happened. So over and over, that would be that was the number one referral source for the first 3 years. It allowed us to focus on building a lot of the product and the platform, while that sort of brought in demand. We also did some other things to supplement it, so we weren't just all in on one thing in case something weird happened with it. And we ended up in that next 2 years, we grew to about 25 million GMV.
Awesome. And then I believe didn't Dribble acquire Crew? Is that
Yes, yeah.
correct?
So at the same time, Unsplash grew a ton. uh, to the point where we had like real hosting costs. So we moved it off of onto a custom site in order just to be able to hold more images that were being submitted. And then there was some real costs that we had to think about. We'd only raised capital for one company. Uh, and so that's when we made the decision to sell Crew. We sold Crew to Dribble, the design online community. And then we went full focus on Splash. So that was 2016 to 2017 was that time frame.
Awesome. Awesome. And then what stage would you say in kind of sense of scale was Unsplash at that point?
We were doing, it was a lot of image downloads, but I would say if you looked at it from the outside, very early, we had maybe thousands of images, but they were supporting a ton of image downloads. I
Yeah.
think we're about 1/5 the size of something like Shutterstock, which is $1 billion company, in terms of how many image downloads we were driving off those hundreds of images. So there was a behavior change that already happened with people. They were coming to Unsplash regularly,
Hmm.
uh, but no business model. Very small team executing, like one and a half people.
Yeah.
Executing just a couple core features.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I believe I was one of those that I think I got the image from Studio Time, the initial kind of embarrassing MVP also.
Yeah.
So, like quite a few of us here in the group when we were launching our companies. So that's definitely super interesting. So as a kind of marketplace, itself for Unsplash, what were some of the early challenges at that stage?
Fortunately, because we didn't intend it to be a company, you sort of have a different perception of what like challenge means. So we just weren't, yeah, you don't expect anything. Like we're doing 10 images every 10 days also. So, we did that on purpose as well. It was like, we are focusing on this other business. So we need, just to have something manageable over here that can sort of repeatedly bring people back.
Mhm.
Uh, and I actually, through that insight, I learned, in terms of like starting a company, that's maybe one of the best ways to start a company. You often see this with some companies that do go on to do really great things. They start as these like little projects, like Google started as a research project. Facebook too didn't have the global ambitions at the start. It was something much more concrete and smaller than that. And I think that's really powerful. That was like what we've took from Unsplash, and I feel that we continue to do that in a lot of other things that we build inside of Unsplash. I would say the challenging part that happened was during that like spin out. So when we decided to sell Crew and move on to Unsplash, that was like the first major big challenge. But then right after that, now it's a company, right? So now you do start to face those same sorts of things that you're thinking about all the time. How do we bring on demand? How do we bring on supply and keep scaling both sides so that they're very happy. The first few was when people had lots of requests for images, and you're going up against like Google Images as the alternate. So you need a lot of supply. Now, one of the insights that we had in our space, most people would always tout like, we've got 60 million assets or 100 million assets. A lot of it was crap though. So we said, you don't need that many. We've already proven that with just hundreds of images. So we don't have to go crazy with it, but we do need to build a big enough library. So we did do some experiments with writing to people. That didn't do so well. Like, we didn't need to do that. It also didn't feel right, but we wanted to just test what that could maybe look like. It was much stronger when people came in sort of on their own accord or through referral. So when we realized that, we just optimized more into that vein. So what can we do to get the existing people contributing images to share, to want to do more? And we just focused there. And that really was what led us to our core metric that we look at internally, which is image downloads. So image downloads will drive both sides of this marketplace. So if we're focused on the image download and making that better, and how do we increase that number? We have to build a better discovery experience for people who are looking for images. If we do that, the image downloads will increase, the viewership on these images will increase. That results in more downstream opportunities for the contributors. It results in more visibility for the contributors. So it ends up helping on both sides. So this was a real turning point moment when we found the metric that we need to be focusing on. Like, we had been looking at different things. Medium at the time, was pushing out a new kind of way of looking at the attention economy using total time spent. But that was not the unique thing of what Unsplash did. There's lots of sites where you can go to be entertained by images, but there's not lots of sites where you can use the actual image and go create something with. So that was the core action, and that's why we really decided again to focus on the image download.
Awesome. And then, so how, I'm kind of interested in hearing a little bit more about how you kind of cultivated the community of not just the photographers or creatives that are looking for images to download, but the contributors.
Yeah. So one of the little things we just wanted to do anyway. Anytime we were traveling anywhere, anyone on the team was traveling anywhere, we would just meet people in that city. It was like this pretty cool thing. We had everything in MailChimp. And I remember I had never been to Korea. My dad was from Korea. We did like our first ever family trip. I was 30 years old and hadn't seen any side of that family. And I was over there and I said, well, let's see who's here. We'll pull up the MailChimp database, and that's when we realized that's our second biggest user base group. So the day before, we just said, hey, let's meet up tomorrow. Dad, pick some spot. I don't really know what's going on here. He found a spot. We had a contributor who volunteered to help. And I think there was 250 people who showed up in like a 10-hour notice period. So that was a really powerful thing. And we've gone and done that in probably, we did about 22 cities. So anytime I'm from the US, so I ended up traveling to the US a lot, even small cities. And you could see it sort of feeling and growing. And a lot of those people are still in the top like 1,000 contributors. I can't name how many people they've probably referred things to and referred more people to. It sounds like a small thing, but I'm a big fan of these like double purpose things that you can do. So I'm traveling anyway, right? So is there something that I could do also at the same time? So you're scaling your time in a way. And I've always thought of different ways that we can do that. So that was a little thing on the contributor side. But really, like, there was some external things that happened that pushed, I think, more of the contributors to be on Unsplash. The qualities of the cameras. So that's one thing that we didn't necessarily anticipate from the beginning, that they would get so good so fast. The original image download, image upload that you had to have, the resolution was like a professional level camera at the start of Unsplash. 3 years later, you could hit that same resolution with an iPhone. And so that just enabled so many more people to be able to contribute to the site. Once we saw that like lots more people were contributing, we didn't worry too much if you were doing one image or 5 or 10, it became all about like, let's keep driving the image downloads because that will just help again back with the contributors.
Awesome. And then how did you, at that time kind of think about competition and kind of navigating?
So the way I view competition, we had a few interesting ways of looking at it. The first is like the obvious direct incumbents, so people who had been doing licensing imagery. So it's like Getty and Shutterstock. Then there was some free sites that cropped up. There was some that I hadn't heard of before because I didn't use them. I didn't really like their experience. They weren't what we wanted to create. Some copycats that came right after us. Like we did 10 images every 10 days. And literally we saw sites that did 9 images every 10 days, 8 images, all the way down to like 1 image every day.
That's I remember that. So that's why I had to ask.
Yeah. And because we weren't at that time, we weren't focusing on the business. It did feel a little like, are we, messing up an opportunity here? Like someone's going to go and take this. Like we started something, but somebody might go and finish it. And there was some people who did benefit a lot from the Unsplash library. They would pull off images and just sort of make a competing site. I would say that was one of our missteps, like not being able to spin out fast enough and get started going to make up that ground. We've done so since, but yeah, that was sort of the lay of the land at the time. But really, as I look forward, it's more about behavior change. And I think we see that across lots of industries. What is the current major behavior that people do? And for that, us, it's really Google Images. So many people still go, even though Google Images is largely an information source, it's meant to be that. A lot of us still go there for images to use and drop into presentations or blog posts. So I look at that more as that's the behavior that we need to be shifting. And the advantage that we have is Google is aligned towards information. That's their mission. They're not aligned towards use. So they keep, whenever they have to make a decision between those two, they're always going to go on the information side. Whereas we don't have a conflicting goal. We will continue to push on the use side. We'll continue to make it better and better.
Cool. And then I also too, I actually saw that on Twitter the other day when Lenny asked about SEO, and this is kind of relevant to that, I believe. But could you just share a little bit about, some drivers for growth and maybe how SEO kind of fits within that?
Yeah, we were also a little late on SEO. So we had some internal debates about what we wanted Unsplash to be. It's amazing how powerful that conversation can actually be to driving the future of your business. Like internally, we thought, is this going to be feed-based, like social network style? Or is it going to be like open search, like Google style? Those are two very different ways of thinking about a product. And being intentional about it makes a big difference to how you're building towards the future. So we actually did start a bit with the feed because we thought this was going to be largely community driven. Nobody was really using the feed. They were using it a bit. The like devoted community members especially were using it. But once we switched to SEO and the focus of much more of like a search, open search destination, it totally changed the game. Our growth just like blew up. One of the big benefits that we had and the flywheels that ended up getting created was how people use the images and credit them. It just sort of adds into all of this, search juice that improves everything. So that was a core strategy from year 2 to now. In the first couple of years, we didn't pay as much attention to that. I would say if I rethought and did it again and we were focused on this as the primary business, we would know that SEO was going to be a strategy eventually and sort of build that into some of the mechanics at the beginning. But it would still have been a huge focus on building the brand and the community at the beginning, because I think that is a huge advantage later. And the SEO, you can build up a good architecture so that it really kicks in over time. But I think it's super powerful when you have that playing with brand and community.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I know. Well, I think we're going to have a few questions in here during the Q&A about SEO specifically. So we'll wait for that. So I did want to chat a little bit about, how you've scaled the team, because I find it quite interesting at, the kind of scale you're at as far as, the number of downloads and your kind of metrics there. and with such a relatively small team?
Yeah, we're 23 people. We've been at 23 roughly, or roughly around that team size, maybe growing 10% over the last 3 years. So we don't really need a lot of people to build this kind of business. That was one of the strategic insights. So it's not like a necessarily just a full-on lifestyle choice. It's like we want less. No, we looked at the strategy and we're like, we just don't need it. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense to be scaling that up. So much of this is product driven growth. So there's a lot of leverage that we can continue building even just from a smaller team. So there's been comparable examples of this, like WhatsApp and Instagram. Instagram had 12 people supporting 200 million users. WhatsApp was order magnitude more than that with like 40 engineers. In our year 5, and even now, we support more users per engineer than Facebook at the same time. So it's definitely possible, but it was more of a strategic decision, and I think it helps us, be more nimble as well. Like we can create things very quickly, and move very fast, but also do it with scale.
Yeah. And was that something you decided early on?
It happened around year two. Once we've really understood this is, search versus feed. What's going to be the compounding strategy that's really going to grow this business, and then you sort of go down from there. What do we need in order to create that? And that's sort of the way that we thought about the team.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so let's jump into another topic that quite a few have messaged me about, which is monetization. So,
yeah, and this was another thing around that same time. Once we were focused full time on Unsplash, we were still largely in the school of thought that we didn't capture enough of like the behavior change, and we wanted to focus more there than on the business model. When we went to fundraise, we realized that there's a truism, I think, that if growth solves everything. Not really. Like we had a ton of growth and we went to the fundraise, and I think truisms in general are not the greatest things to be following because everything is unique and there's so many variables going into it. Unsplash had that thing too. Like the unique thing about our space was people couldn't quite see how big the reach was of Unsplash, because I think part of it was even the way that we were telling the story. It's like unsplash.com itself, if you're going to do something around advertising, let's say, you need 200 billion, image views happening a month for that to be like really, really big scale. And at the time when we were fundraising, I think we were around like 2 billion. So there's already a ton of scale and people are like, I can't see it getting to this thing on your site. So that was definitely one of the challenges during fundraising. But our monetization model was also a strategic decision. So we looked at it like, what is the future of image media going to look like? It's not licensing. Like if we've got a camera and you could go and roughly take the picture that you need, are you going to go pay a licensing fee for something similar? You can hire a photographer. That's another option if you want something that looks good and is a bit more custom. So we felt there's just going to be a big shift that's happening there, and we'd rather get in front of that than try to squeeze like the remaining dwindling percentages that still kind of sit there in licensing. So the model that we apply is we work with brands who want distribution. They want people to see and use their visuals so that they can sort of dominate the visual language in their category. An example of that is we work with like Harley Davidson. Anything that's written about motorcycles or adventure, they'd love to have the new image of their Harley sitting in that post or that presentation. Same thing, we work with Boxed Water. How can they become the brand that's synonymous with sustainability and a different kind of moving on beyond like the plastic water bottle. So there's a lot of those things that brands are looking to shift and change, and Unsplash enables them to do that. We don't compete against like Facebook or Google. That's not a moral thing we want to do, and that's also just not a strategic thing. We just don't have You don't want to compete in data against Facebook and Google. So yeah, that was really the thinking behind it. There's challenges around any advertising business because when I think the reflex when you hear advertising is just like Google and Facebook, how are you going to ever beat them? They're dominating everything in digital. But if you look closer, we're not competing directly with them. There's different kinds of advertising. The advertising that we're really going after is sitting inside of brand advertising dollars, which is typically done on TV, and it's 50% of the budget. The other 50 sits, yes, in Facebook and Google and other things. But that's really more where we compete. And we have something that's differentiated and unique. So it has pull with advertisers.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing more on that. So we are going to jump into questions here in a little bit because I have quite a few messages about it. But before we do, could you maybe share, some maybe some like kind of key learnings along the way of the Unsplash journey with us, here as kind of like early stage marketplace founders?
Yes. So I mean, the big stuff is that first risk. Can you prove demand? Because these marketplace ideas, they seem kind of obvious, like they should exist. And to me, that's like the big thing. The question is, can you get people to come to your thing? Can you get that flywheel turning? Um, which I think is just indicative of, is it a good product? Is it a good team? So it's the one metric that, why do people look at growth? It's like, because people want the thing. So that's why it's not like just a random thing that people chose. I think it's indicative of underlying things that are going on with what you're building. So solving for that first, I think, is imperative. And then also other things at the beginning, setting up the team right. So co-founders, that's a huge leverage point. They're the same people who are going to be fully aligned with you through the whole thing. And there's so many moments where without my co-founders, like emotional stability, it's just, you need it until you experience like some of these things that you go through. I see some like marketplace founders nodding their heads about going through this stuff. You can feel the difference when you have those people around who know what's going on. They have the context, and you can all be there for each other. So those are the two most important things at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I think we can, almost all of us can agree. So on that, so cool. So we're going to jump into questions right here. So let's see, actually, Mitch, did you want to come on?
Sure, thanks. So I'm on your site right now, just like browsing around, and I was curious how you guys like came up with your methodology as to how you categorize like and tag your content, and making that an in-house thing, like more centralized thing, or like a community driven thing is even what it looks like, as opposed to like a more decentralized thing where you just let your user base kind of tag things and categorize, and I guess like how that all plays into your larger value prop and your kind of North Star metric.
Yeah, the start of it was us tagging. So we just didn't have the systems. So we did that internally ourselves. We layered on some AI to do that automatically and recognize some things that were in images. This was third party off the shelf stuff at the beginning. And then the community would still end up adding additional tags because we had collections. So people would make collections of visuals, and that would add to the tagging system as well. So, and then it would show up in searches and it would start servicing. So the tags would actually build over time. That took us a couple of years to build that kind of infrastructure. Now it's much more sophisticated, but it's relatively the same pieces. So when someone's uploading an image, there's automatic tagging that happens. The photographer can still add additional ones if if the system missed something that they think that makes sense. Then we have an editorial team that's adding additional tags. We have a community members who are kind of like editors as well, who add additional tags that they potentially see value. And then it's sort of put out into the system. Additional tags are then layered on that visual over time. That has become more important, especially in the last couple of years, where we are trying to help fill in the library. And one of the things that we found was in the early days, because our tagging system was not as robust, we had visuals that could be being surfaced in other searches that weren't. So over the last year, we've done a big project of going back into the images and recategorizing, making sure that everything is surfacing where it could be, just so we don't randomly just try to increase, the number of visuals when we might already have these visuals in the system.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. That's a great question. So thanks for sharing more on that. Cool. Let's see. Hey, Kenny, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I'm a big fan of the product. I use it very often. So I'm excited to chat with you. My name is Kenny Hansen. I'm the founder of a company called Mentor Pass, which does mentorship for early stage founders. And my question's around business development and partnerships. And it's something that I've seen that you guys have done really well. Most recently, recognizing that you guys are completely embedded in pitch. And whenever I'm building, documents in there, it's super easy to search through Unsplash and find the right photo. So I'm curious, was that an initial driver of growth, or was that something that you found you were able to layer on once you already had kind of the brand and the community and the initial business established? Like, at what point in your journey did you guys really start focusing on those partnerships and getting into Figma ecosystems and everything like that?
Yeah. So we didn't have the API until about the second year that we were going on it full time. So our team size was about 4 people by that point. There was already a lot of people coming to unsplash.com, the destination. So I think that was really important, because if you're going to build an API off of that other people can use, then you definitely want to make sure people are using single images, from your site directly before they're going to go and want to maybe use the whole library. So that was the thinking between that. It felt obvious because we had seen use cases. So people, right when we launched Unsplash, they were building things even without an API. So we had somebody who created something where you could mass download all the images and they would drop into a Dropbox. So you'd automatically have them. There are lots of different versions of that. And I think that is something to look for if you're thinking of an API strategy. So we had these feelings of it. We didn't have like the full-fledged strategy necessarily of how big that would be and how much it would account for. So like today, the API accounts for half of the Unsplash traffic. And we see it as our next area of major growth. The site itself can probably be a top 100 site, but through the API, we have 8,000 integrations today. And that's still 1/10 of where that can potentially be. So the strategy at the beginning was just open it up, grassroots, like let people use it. And then it became more intentional around that 2-year building point where we said, there's some really interesting use cases that could probably help us grow. So big companies, presentations, like all those use cases that we were seeing. So we just started those initial conversations. We actually experimented even with charging for the API. So once you reached a certain level, you would be charged for the number of calls that you were making. Once we defined the strategy around including brands and how it was really about getting mass distribution on images, that actually fought against that strategy because it would cap, it was de-incentivizing an API partner. So we said, cut that. We need to go fully in this direction of keeping it open. And then by having one person at the beginning just really focused on it, changed the game. So we put my co-founder Steph, she led partnerships, like different kinds of partnerships. And we just said, let's just do just API partnerships. And that just became her sole focus. And that's really was that start of the intentional scaling. Plus we had the grassroots access to it.
Yeah, that's great. And so was that mostly like an outbound job from Steph that you guys like were kind of targeting big ecosystems and you were going after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was outbound. Once we found this over and over again, once you can get one marquee partner, just using that for everything. And yeah, I think getting to that one is big. And then also having a high quality product, the way that we made sure to do that and basically align our incentive with making a high quality API was to build unsplash.com on the Unsplash API. So unsplash.com actually operates on our own API, which means, yeah, everybody is constantly working just on the API.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was a great question. I was actually going to ask about that myself. So cool. Hey, Rich, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. Hey, my name is Rich. I'm the founder of a marketplace called Unibo, which is an office design marketplace. We were actually a contributor to Unsplash and love the product. It's actually been a massive unlock for our own SEO. We have like 5,000 downloads, tons of views and stuff. So it's been great for us. I remember when I was uploading these images, it kind of went through this control process to make sure that we weren't duplicating images. We weren't putting bad quality stuff up there. Could you talk a little bit more about the operational process and how you kind of manage the upload experience and make sure that it's all that high quality stuff?
Yes, I think the best comparison is like an app store. So there's a submission process. When you submit images, over time, originally we didn't have it. Like we just had people checking the images. Is this basic things like, is this high resolution? Are there watermarks? We need to get more sophisticated over time because people would upload images that had appeared elsewhere. So eventually we layered on some tech in there that would detect if an image has been posted elsewhere on the internet. We had the ability to notice if there was brands or faces as well. And then that would require an additional, you have to sign off on this and approval before we make sure that you have the rights to distribute this before we put that up. But yeah, so kind of like how we scaled most things, it was single person at the start. That person identifies the things that they're always doing and kind of writes the playbook to it. Some things happen, we see them as potential risks, and they happen enough where it makes sense to build some technology. And so that's largely how we scaled it out. It was, I think we did all of this over a three-year process just to give sort of a time frame to it. And so it's in a good spot now.
Yeah, I was very impressed. Thank you.
Hey, Mikael, I actually had a question for you myself, which is, since it definitely sounds like you're a product kind of, driven company, what is kind of like the team kind of makeup and org like as far as a focus on, like I would say from like an ops side versus like a kind of like a pure engineering?
Yeah, of the 23 people, 14 are in product. So designers, engineers, basically we're bare bones pretty much in the other areas of the company. Some of that is a factor of figuring out the unit economics of the business. So we just started monetizing this year, and we knew that the sales cycles in the kind of advertising product that we're selling are long. So we needed to see those out, see what a potential salesperson could do before going and leveling up that team. So there will be more scale that happens on the sales team going forward. But engineering is still just as important. So they'll both likely scale. It'll probably end up being like a 50-50 thing. Like half is in product engineering, and then half or maybe a little less is in sales and partnerships.
Got it. And then what's the day in life of the CEO of Unsplash like for you? Where do you spend most of your time?
So I'm always thinking about, like, I think about this for a lot of people on the team. So I really, when we look at like our org chart, with it, I've actually put the unique talent that each person has, and then the stuff that's in their way. So the stuff that's in their way represents potential new roles. But when you see their unique talents, and then you have a risk that sort of comes through or an opportunity that comes through, I look for who is sort of the optimal people to be able to take that opportunity based like the cross-reference of that opportunity and the optimal skill set that they have. So in my sense, I handle for the advertising product, for example, I rolled out like the first story and the version of it and the deck, and I did a lot of the pitching because my skill set sits largely in that spot. And it was the most beneficial thing that I could do to the company because it was the largest opportunity that we needed to figure out at the time. And so that's similar for different people in the company. So like Steph, my co-founder, she did API partnerships, and then she's doing brand partnerships because that has become a new opportunity that's very important. That also matches with the unique, talent that she's good at. So a day in my life now, I think a lot about, one of the things is having an advertising product at scale. You need to think about how do you get people to think about it in the same way as the other two or three major advertising platforms. So I think a lot about like PR today. I'm kind of out of the direct sales process now. It's in a really good spot, and that team is able to move forward and iterate on it. I did like the 0 to 1 bit in that. But the second part of making this scalable ad sales strategy is an element of PR and elevating, the company. So I think a lot about that. So there's not necessarily a lot of like doing stuff. I'm doing a lot of like thinking, and then I'll think of some core strategy and then build like a team around it, and we'll execute on what that is.
That's great. Thanks for sharing more. So cool. So we have time for probably like one or two more questions. But Tomas, did you want to come on?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and also Michael, thanks for chatting and taking the time to connect with us. Really great to hear about your experience and really get the kind of under the hood story. I'm the founder of a marketplace that connects unused resources to help surfers get in the water more. And I'd love to hear about a little bit more about kind of your process. Earlier you were talking about the importance of the founding team as like a core kind of pillar of the business moving forward, and that's very much where I'm at right now. Is kind of transitioning from like, oh, this has been a really interesting side project to, oh, there's some real traction here. I want to commit to this full time, and I need to get my people like on board. And a couple of questions that I had about your relationship with your co-founder or co-founders is in terms of like establishing the relationship. Were you going like externally out to find them, or were you kind of like receiving inbound interest? You kind of made a decision there. And the second question is, once you kind of identified the right people, did you start with like, okay, let's try this out for like 3 months with like this, like a scope of work to really test out the relationship? Or did you immediately go to like, all right, let's have a conversation about equity?
Yeah, at the beginning, so I was here in Montreal and I didn't know anybody. I had zero network. And even Twitter was still really early. Like there wasn't good tools to do some digital networking either. I also didn't know. I was kind of like clueless about everything. Like when we started the company, I didn't know even what a term sheet was. I didn't know what a deck was. Like an investor asked for a deck and I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And so that's like the base of where I started. And I felt maybe I could become a node in the ecosystem. Like, can I be something that connects other people? So one of my first ideas was I saw an online group called Hackers and Founders, which is essentially this. Like, also, what kind of founders are you looking for? Is it like a technical co-founder, or are you technical?
Technical co-founder, yeah.
Is what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the main focus for me. Like I knew that I didn't have technical skills at the time. So I was very interested in meeting technical people. I was just genuinely curious, but also wanted to meet more people building things. And I felt that was like the ideal thing to try to take in Montreal. It didn't exist here yet. It was huge in Silicon Valley. I think it was the biggest meetup group. And so I just wrote to the guy and said, could I start like the Montreal chapter? That was one thing I tried, and I did that a bit more at scale. I kept doing that. I would do different events in that sense. I would say that was interesting from getting to know people, but the thing that was most impactful when I worked at the agency, that's where I met some of the first people, and I was able to work alongside them. When I freelanced, I was able to work with an engineer and got to know him really well. I think, yeah, being able to work with people is big before you're able to jump in. That kind of happened in an automatic way. I didn't necessarily plan to start a company. I had just looked back at, these are the people that I knew. Like, my wife is a co-founder. She does this thing. I only knew so many people. So that was that decision. Now, what I think, if I were to just do this again, I think it's important to have the mission and the idea that you're thinking about, and people being excited about that. So if you can write the manifesto, and then I think especially interesting to anybody who's technical or makes things is, how good are you at showing your unique talent, whether that is building hype, or, you know, can you write, can you create an audience, what do you bring to the table? Because technical people and product people, they have options. The good people can do whatever they want. So you sort of need to stand out from all the other people. So I would be looking at it like, imagine you had to go at this alone. What could you create before you brought somebody in? And you could probably make it attractive to a certain point. You could have pre-launch stuff. You could write the manifesto. You could start building an audience. And at the same time, through that process, you're probably going to meet some technical people, but it's going to be a slower process than you might want it to be. But I think it's one of the move slow to go fast situations. I would definitely do that. Spend a lot of time getting those right people at the beginning. It's going to be the number one reason you succeed, or the number one reason if you fail.
Cool. Thanks so much.
That was great. Thanks. All right. So I think we have time for one more question, and Kenny wants to come back on really quick. So.
Yeah, it's me again. So let's say we've got an audience of $13 billion founders here. What is your pitch to these growing brands to invest in search on Unsplash? What is the actual value proposition of, this is why you should invest your time here instead of going into Google? And then I have a follow-on question after that.
Yeah, so first, I think still do Google. We serve a different purpose than them. What Unsplash is really about is you can dominate the visuals in your category across the internet. So what that really means is, you can sit in people's minds, right? Like rent-free, basically. And the way that happens, you put images on Unsplash, people will spread them and use them. And that is a super powerful thing. Like when you just get paired by a creator by choice. So a creator is coming to Unsplash and writing, this is a Forbes writer, and they're going to write on, the future of travel. And they search travel on Unsplash. And your brand visuals are sitting there. They think they're good. They put them in the post. You become starting like synonymous as that brand that becomes that association. And all of that is going to happen 260,000 times every 2 months. So you can hire a PR firm who might get you 10 articles, 20 articles, or you can just set it on autopilot on Unsplash and get 250,000 every 2 months.
That's great. I'm sold. So now the next question is, how do I get started, and how do you actually rank well on Unsplash? And if there are any insider founder tips, that's very much appreciated.
Hey, Kenny, you're trying to get affiliate sales?
I'm trying to get some mentors on Unsplash. Next time you search mentor, I want to see Mike Williams.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's the right way to think about it. Yeah, you connect with our team. We have unsplash.com/brands is the page. And there's a link there and a little form that you can fill out, which initially starts off with some questions because we want to make sure that we can hit the goals that you want to hit. And then it starts with image selection that matches with those brand goals. There's the option to pay to sponsor them so that they're guaranteed, the visibility. And that's really it. You can run it for X period of time on X number of keywords. We are focused still right now on like brands that have minimum 50K spend to do this, just largely because of where we're at in scaling up the ad product. But eventually, this is going to be an opportunity that anybody can access.
That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that was a great way to wrap things up, and I appreciate your time, Mikael. So just one last kind of question before we do wrap it up. Out of curiosity, do you have a favorite kind of image or one that just like really kind of stuck out with you over the years?
I have a OMG collection on my account that I had to start because I was losing track of like these images I have the Unsplash Mac wallpaper, and sometimes you just sit down and you see this thing and it's amazing, and I wanted to save them. So that's the folder. It's on my account on Unsplash if you just search my name. And there's a few that stick out to me. One of the first ones was like this shot of a bear and it's super up close of his face. I think it was one of the first 200 images. We ended up hiring the guy, and he's an engineer at Unsplash. So there's a connection story to that visual that I find really interesting.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks again. This was super insightful, and I really appreciate taking the time to join us. So time for a quick kind of plug right before we wrap it up. Where can we keep up with you?
Twitter is best. So at Mikael Cho is my name.
Awesome. Great. I'll include that in the link to the details to this. So, all right. Well, thanks again for joining us, everyone. And we really appreciate it, Mikael.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks, everyone.